Welcome everybody to our Leaders in Housing Counseling call in mid-July. Very glad to have you, and thanks for the high level of participation people are on this call. And again, just another shout out of appreciation for the important work you're doing out in the field. It's impressive, and we continue to hear both anecdotes and see evidence of the engagement, and you all are grappling with not only transitioning to a virtual world, but really working with people in crisis, from the income challenges of the COVID-19 crisis, and plenty of other issues out there. We are really glad you're doing this, and should know that we are really continuing to hear tremendous support in Congress. We're trying to hear from policymakers. We are hearing from lenders and servicers about the good work you're doing, and appreciate that you're out there in the field making all this happen. So we're going to do a few things. We're going to spend some time on the legislative update. A lot's happening. Melody's been hard at work. We have had a number of initiatives and many things in progress. Plus we have Marcia Griffin, who is testifying for housing counseling in front of the House Financial Services Committee in Congress right now. And some of us just jumped off of that call to be on this one. And she's doing a terrific job, so that's great. But there's plenty of things going on, and Melody can fill you in on all of that. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the counselor certification, and where things are at and where we want to take it over the next few months. It's worth thinking about that while a lot of us are focused on the August 1 deadline, and we really hope we're going to get an extension, and I'm betting that they will do that. I think the momentum and the kind of need is overwhelming to me. But regardless of what happens, we really need to also think about how to make certification work more effectively, that more people are passing the test, more people are being able to move to the next phase, and what do we need to do both with HUD and on our own to get us there. And I'll talk a little bit just sort of what the thinking is about what the next step is. Most of the call will be devoted to the CFPB consumer complaint database. We have talked about this in the past, but the idea is to have this as part of the tool of repertoire for housing counselors, as part of how we help improve the performance of mortgage servicing, and so we'll have a really good list of people who will be talking about that. We'll make our usual NHRC membership plug, and I have to say I'm really delighted that I know the organizations are under a lot of strain, and you all are coming in, and we've had a number of new memberships, and we have had lots of renewals, and this gives us independence to do our work, so thank you for that. And our next call will be in the end of July, July 30th. So with that note, let's move on to the legislative update. So Melody, tell us about what's going on.
Sure, thank you, Bruce. And then before the end of my part of the presentation, I'll go a little bit into the House Financial Services hearing that's happening right now about the mortgage servicers' implementation of their part of the CARES Act and the role housing counseling plays into that with our partner, Marcia Griffin from Home3. Just really quickly on appropriations. So this week, the House Appropriations Committee voted favorably to fund housing counseling assistance for $75 million for the upcoming fiscal year 2021. We're really happy about this. This has been almost 2 years of work from advocates and practitioners really making the case for housing counseling. Fiscal year 2020 numbers were $53 million. So this is a pretty sizable increase. And given that the president's budget request for 2021 once again had housing counseling at $45 million, we're really happy to see that both Democrats and Republicans in the House Appropriations Committee recognizes the need for increased funding. Shout out to Representative Price and Representative Diaz-Balart, the chairman and ranking member, respectively, of the House Appropriations THUD subcommittee that oversees the jurisdiction of the housing counseling program. We work really closely with both offices, and they've been really good champions of this program, both of them. So special thanks to Florida and North Carolina advocates for continuing the drumbeat on housing counseling. Next steps for the House is that eventually it will go to the floor to be voted on and passed by the full chamber. And then it goes over to the Senate. The Senate returns from recess July 20th, and the House goes into recess July 31st. So we have a couple of weeks to really make the case to pass this to the finish line, across the finish line, excuse me. I'm hopeful that the House will pass housing counseling assistance at this figure, and then it goes over to the Senate. And we've heard a number of different things from our allies in the Senate around housing counseling assistance for appropriations versus COVID. And we'll continue making that case. But as of right now, we don't know exact numbers for housing counseling assistance over at the Senate, but I imagine that following the House, we'll get some stronger indication of what they'll fund it as. Next slide. So what we have been hearing a lot about, as everyone can imagine, is the COVID-19 pandemic relief package. Lawmakers are calling this phase 4. Phase 3 obviously was the CARES Act, and there's been a lot of negotiations since then on what the next stimulus bill will look like. We hear that the Senate Republicans will unveil their COVID-19 relief stimulus language next week. That is not a guarantee, but we're hopeful. We have pretty good sources on that. And we don't know at all what would be in the legislation. We're unsure if it's going to be based on the HEROES Act, which passed the House, I should note, with no Republican support, but it included $100 million for housing counseling assistance. And we're really happy with that number. Because that is an appropriation, we imagine that is the number that they might be working from, but there's no guarantee. This is much lower than the Representative Axne bill, Democrat from Iowa, and Chairman Waters of House Financial Services proposal, which had $100 million for housing counseling assistance. Not 100, excuse me, $700 million for housing counseling assistance from Chairman Waters and Representative Axne's proposals. This is the proposal that the Brown-Menendez legislation is based off of, the Coronavirus Housing Counseling Improvement Act, S4098. And that may be in play. However, that is an authorization bill, so we're unsure whether or not Republicans will even consider it. There's 21 co-sponsors, all Dems, but we have pretty significant Dem banking support. So this is a priority for the Senate Democrats. They will definitely push for a much higher figure than what we anticipate Senate Republicans will request. However, in our conversations with key Republican offices, so whether that's Crapo's office or Senator Shelby, who is the chair of Senate Appropriations, we don't hear much controversy. They recognize that housing counseling is important, and they believe that funding the program and funding groups is critical, even in recovery with COVID-19. But again, what we honestly run into more often than not is the number, and what number they agree on will largely depend on how loud a voice advocates have in moving the housing counseling up as a priority for both sides of the aisle. Next slide. And before I finish on COVID-19 relief, we have at least a couple of weeks before both chambers go into recess as it's currently scheduled. And so I would just advise everyone to please reach out to your lawmakers. If they sit on banking or appropriations, they are critical, critical, critical. If they are a Republican senator who sits on banking or appropriations, we need them more than ever. We have amazing leadership in the House. We have strong support in the House. But what many housing advocates are running into is that it's just hard to break through Senate Republicans, especially Senate Republican leadership on committees. And while we might hear good things from Crapo and Shelby, they want their Republican members of their committee to be asking for funding and for these bills. And so if they don't hear from their members, they're going to think it's not as important, even if they recognize its significance. So just asking people to really reach out and be vocal, whether that's a phone call, an email, Zoom meeting, whatever you can do. And I'm happy to try and facilitate that. But an example of advocates really working closely with the lawmakers is actually a development that came in the last 2 weeks. Senator Tina Smith, Democrat from Minnesota, heard from housing counselors in her state that they were concerned about the HUD certification deadline and how maintaining that deadline, and Bruce will speak more to this after my presentation, could potentially have a disruption in services in Minnesota because not all groups have passed the certification test. Recognizing that a disruption would be horrible to recovery for COVID-19, Senator Tina Smith decided to lead the charge in circulating a letter asking HUD for a delay to the deadline for housing counseling certification. And she managed to get, in a very short turnaround, 13 signers to the letter, including Senators Van Hollen from Maryland, Cortez Masto from Nevada, Wyden from Oregon, Brown and Menendez, who are the champions on the Coronavirus Housing Counseling Improvement Act, Senator Harris from California, as well as Senator Booker. So this is just one very strong effort. We appreciate Senator Tina Smith doing this work, worked really closely with her staff on this. But this is just one example of how a very strong relationship and being vocal about your needs elevates the urgency of supporting housing counseling, but especially during this time. And we love seeing this sort of thing. We love facilitating it. And so I simply say to everyone that think of this as encouragement, that people are talking about housing counseling is making the waves. And senators and lawmakers want to hear from you. They want to know what's going on the ground. And before I throw it over back to Bruce, another example of this is over the hearing that's happening right now in House Financial Services. It's being done through the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations. And essentially what this is, that they're discussing the oversight of mortgage servicers implementation through the CARES Act. And so what their concern was, just to give a brief overview, is that on May 4th, Chairman Waters and key members of the House Financial Services Committee, Representatives Green, Meeks, and Clay, sent document request letters to the largest mortgage servicers in the United States, seeking information on implementation of the CARES Act, on their forbearance and foreclosure protections, how many requests are being received and approved, call volume, and the number of complaints they're receiving. Staff received almost 15,000 pages of records. And what they found in their investigation was that not all servicers are providing borrowers with the option of the initial 180-day forbearance as required by the CARES Act, as well as confusion on, from some consumers why their forbearance plan was 90 days when they originally requested 180 and so forth. Our great partner, Marcia Griffin, who is head of Home Free USA, is currently testifying before the committee to discuss the importance of housing counseling and their agencies during this time, and how they're educating consumers and protecting consumers really during this period, and how it's really important that housing counselors serve as sort of I hate the word middleman, but a middleman between consumers and mortgage servicers, and protecting consumers from it. It's really a really confusing marketplace at this time, and that improved servicer request representative scripts, better frameworks for affordable loan modifications, and increased financial support for housing counseling would go really far to improve the housing market during this time. So we really appreciate her being a strong champion for housing counseling to the committee, and informing lawmakers and their staff the work you guys are doing right now on the ground. So that's what's happening right now with Congress, and I'll throw it back over to Bruce.
Thank you again, Melody, and thanks for everybody who has contacted their House and Senate members. We expect that the next 2 weeks, and I suspect maybe 3 weeks, so going, there may be that the House, which is supposed to adjourn at the end of July, might go an extra week, we have heard. So within that period of time, COVID-19 legislation will be addressed. This phase 4 or 4.0 will be around. So please watch out for emails from Melody about specifically targeted things we can do at the moment that we learn what's available. We will can keep you informed on all of this. We know it's crucial to everybody's work. So let's talk about certification. And I know that we're all concerned about the August 1st deadline for housing counselor certification. And I am hoping that this will all get cleared up sooner rather than later, and there will be an extension provided to us, to our industry, so that we can have more time for people to actually get the trainings and the testing, and hopefully get through the COVID-19 crisis. We'll see what happens with all of that. My guess is that they'll figure out how to do it, but I don't know for sure, and we are all eager to hear what HUD will do as quickly as possible. Certainly, many of you have participated in the many efforts we've done to get this to be moved forward, and we will continue to keep pushing. But also, I want us to think, well, it's not just about the deadline, and I think everybody's aware that we really need to figure out what we need to do in the next few months, really the next year, to get more counselors passed. So we're a little bit over half of the housing counseling community has passed the test, and we have seen some challenges for people, surprisingly, but maybe interesting, that people who have a lot of experience in the housing counseling field have taken the test several times and not passed, even though we feel strongly that they are very competent counselors. We know that people have had problems with language, people who have who are English isn't their first language. They've had challenges with, in the case of Spanish, with the translations, and with other languages with the lack of any translation. And we also think that we continue to hear concerns about how the test works, and we're also concerned that there are apparently agencies out there where nobody's taken the test yet. So all of this is about our future as a industry or as a community, to be successful, to be able to deliver services for all of us, for all of our programs. We really need to have a strong and successful workforce out there, and well-staffed organizations around the country. So the idea is to put together a working group that really focuses on concrete thoughts and programs and proposals we can make, especially to HUD, but also for ourselves, so that we can shape make the next few months the most valuable possible and get more people through the system. And so the idea is, I sent out an email yesterday, and the email had a link for people who could sign up to be part of this working group. So this isn't for people to test. This is actually people who have the long view of how are we going to make this work and work more effectively. So if you're a director, a trainer, manager, senior counselor, somebody who who's taken the test and has deep knowledge about it, we want to think about, are there ways to improve on the content of the test? Are there ways to address the challenges with technology? Are there ways to handle and improve the language issues? Try to understand what will be most useful. Are there other things we can do in the training world? So please, if you're interested and have some time to spend on this, we do think this is pretty critical stuff. I really appreciate the emails that people have been sending, which have been deeply knowledgeable and specific and very helpful in helping us shape what the kinds of issues are. We think it's also going to be important when people, right after they've taken the test, to write down and share what their experience was in terms of questions that were difficult to understand, or things that might, if there's any chance that something is wrong in the wording. Sounds like we will have some ability to get HUD to take a second look at things like that. They apparently do adjustments on the test pretty regularly. I didn't know that until this week, and it's an opportunity for us to really be more successful on this time around. We will still work on this on a second stream, which will be completely on recruiting people to the housing counseling industry and creating more of a career path for people who've never heard of housing counseling, but might be able to embrace the mission and the urgency of our work to bring some new people in, especially if there's new funding coming in. We're very interested in this idea of recruiting people in, having them take the test at the very beginning, and then get hired at agencies where the full training can be completed, so that agencies aren't having to start from scratch when they have to bring in new staff. So that's a separate initiative, and what we're really recruiting for right people who can help us improve the opportunities for existing counselors and performance of the test. So more on that coming forward, but email went out yesterday. You can search under certification to, I think it was called Next Steps in Counselor Certification. But if you're interested and can devote some time and really think about this, please sign up, and the working group will start moving forward shortly. And I'm hoping that we'll have a robust conversation in July and August on this. And HUD has already indicated they would welcome our input on this. We will definitely want to do as much as we can to make all this work effectively. Okay, so with that, let's pivot on to the main topic, and I'm going to hand it over to Ellie. Ellie, are you there?
I'm here. So
okay.
Bruce, before we jump onto that, one person did mention that it would be important to say something to HUD about the cumbersome and glitchy nature of the remote platform. I didn't know if you wanted to comment on that at all.
You know, and so this is the kind of stuff we need to drill down into. So the question, I get that, and I think HUD has heard it, and I think we've had a lot of people comment on it, but we have to figure out what is it concretely we can propose that's an alternative. So the reason that it's complicated is that it's a compliance issue, and the firm that they hired uses this to make sure that, in fact, the person taking the test is that person, and that they're not, cribbing notes or whatever. And so that's why there's a lot of tough parameters. But for people that have done that remotely, and it might be helpful to figure out, are there things we can propose either to the groups that are doing it or to HUD to improve on that? So our job is yes.
There is a proposal, and that is to use the HECM test model.
Right.
I think it's a different outfit that does the HECM exam. I don't think it's Criterion, but that's the suggestion, is to look at what is used for the HECM exam.
Cool. So that's the kind of concrete thing that's helpful. Good. Thanks. You're still in charge, though, now, Elliot. Take it away.
Okay, great. All right, thanks, Bruce, and thanks everybody for your input on that. We are going to pivot to a presentation by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They're going to talk with us about the complaint database, and I just want to comment. In my previous life as a regional coordinator for a bunch of different housing counseling and legal services groups in New York State, one of the things that I used to constantly say is you have to file a complaint. You have to file a complaint. And so this was during the financial crisis, and we did start to come out of that and started to move forward some, and now we are under COVID-19, and there are a lot of issues that consumers are having. So the complaint database becomes more important than ever. So I have invited Scott Steckel, who's the Stakeholder Engagement Program Manager for the Office of Consumer Response, to do a presentation with us on using the complaint database and how to move through it and what's important to make sure that your complaint actually goes through all the way. And then Mark McCardle, who's the Assistant Director, Mortgage Markets, Research, Markets, and Regulations at CFPB, is on to provide a little bit of backup. So with that, I am going to go ahead and turn this over to Scott. Are you with us, Scott?
All right, thanks very much, Ellie. Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining the call this afternoon. This is Scott Steckel. Again, I work in the Office of Consumer Response. It's really a pleasure to be part of the conversation today. I've been with the Bureau since about 2011. I joined the Bureau after working with the FDIC's Depositor Services Unit during the financial crisis. You know, I've worked with consumers and focused on consumer issues most of my career. During the early 90s, I worked on community-based lending initiatives. I co-wrote underwriting guidelines for an affordable housing mortgage program, and I've worked directly with hundreds of families to help them achieve the American dream of homeownership. I offer that little bit of background today just to let you know how much I value the work that you all do as housing counselors, and let you know that your informed perspective is important to us here at the Bureau. I mentioned Consumer Response, the office that I work with. As you all know, collecting, investigating, and responding to consumer complaints is one of the primary functions of the Bureau. Our office maintains procedures to ensure that consumers get timely responses to consumer complaints and inquiries. You may not also know that we also answer consumers' telephone questions about financial products and services. We get about 20,000 phone calls a month at our US-based consumer resource centers. So, of course, we publish, we accept and route consumers' complaints directly to financial companies. We work with the companies, including mortgage servicers, to get consumers a response, generally within 15 days. Consumers can reach us online through our website, consumerfinance.gov, or by phone at 855-411-CFPB. Now, we publish information about complaints. That's often referred to when we talk about the Consumer Complaint Database. We put information out on the Bureau's website. We use the latest technologies and security protocols to make sure that consumers' information is safe and secure. I won't spend too much time on that public listing of complaints today because the Bureau is actually conducting another public event tomorrow about the latest enhancements to the public-facing Consumer Complaint Database. So for those interested, you can find more information on the Bureau's website about Consumer Financial Protection Week. I'm going to talk a little bit more about really the complaint process and how you all might use the complaint process and what the value of that and the benefit might be. Again, Consumer Response, in addition to facilitating the process, we analyze consumer complaints. We look at company responses to those complaints, and we look at consumer feedback to those responses, and we assess the accuracy, completeness, and timeliness of those responses. And consumer complaints and the company's actions in response to those complaints are an important input to the Bureau's work. We share and we report internally to our offices of supervision and enforcement information, insights, data, and details that we see in these complaints and how companies are handling. So it's important insights into problems that consumers, and in this situation, homeowners are experiencing in the marketplace, helps the Bureau regulate consumer financial products and services, helps the Bureau enforce those laws, and it helps the Bureau educate and empower consumers so that they're making informed financial decisions. Now, there's a few other things that we do with complaints that a lot of folks may not know. We share consumer complaint information with all the prudential regulators. We share complaint information with the Federal Trade Commission through the Consumer Sentinel. We share complaint information with other federal agencies and state agencies. And just as an example of what that means, a consumer complaint sent to the CFPB and the company's response to that complaint is available to state attorney generals, state banking agencies, and as you all know, many of the banking agencies and state agencies license mortgage servicers within their state. So there's an amplifying effect to what's going on when a complaint comes through the Bureau's system. As far as the homeowner or the consumer themselves, many consumers receive positive outcomes when an issue is raised to a company through a regulatory complaint channel. A complaint sent to servicers by the CFPB are given a higher level of scrutiny by corporate compliance officers who monitor and report legal risks and customer service issues to their company leadership. So that supplements the work that all of you do as you're engaging single points of contact and other servicer personnel, because through the Bureau's complaints, servicer executives are on notice that the CFPB is hearing from their customers. No servicer wants to be an outlier with a higher volume or a greater severity of complaints than their peers. As far as the volume of complaints, we have more than 5,000 financial companies using the company portal, and they've provided consumers with responses to more than 1.6 million complaints. Companies are expected to respond in 15 days. In some cases, a company will provide an interim response, come back and provide a final response within 60 days. But for the most part, we're seeing an average closing response of about 20 to 21 days. Now, what's important out of a company response is what the CFPB requires. We require that companies provide, at a minimum, a response to a consumer complaint that provides the following. We ask the company to list the steps that have been taken by the company to respond to that inquiry or complaint of the consumer. We ask the company to detail and itemize the responses that the consumer that they've received from the consumer, and we also ask the company to detail follow-up actions or planned follow-up actions by that company to respond to the complaint or inquiry. So a substantive response has a lot of key information, a lot of substance in there to let the Bureau know not only what the problem was that the consumer had, but how the company reacted to that and what the company did in response to that. So in concert with your work on behalf of homeowners, I can definitely say that consumer complaints make a difference. I mentioned different options for consumers to submit a complaint. I think you should be able to see on your screen now, I have the Bureau's website. The best way to submit complaints is, again, through the website, consumerfinance.gov. I'd like to take a few minutes to walk through the complaint form. It's rather intuitive, but there's some unique navigations for complaints submitted by authorized third parties. So if you'll bear with me to go through a little bit of a clicking demo here. Again, on the Bureau's website, top right corner, you can see the Submit a Complaint link. As you go in, you'll get a little bit of background about the complaint process. You'll get into and you'll want to start the complaint. The complaint will open up a complaint form. First thing we ask the consumer, the submitter of the complaint, let us know what product or service the complaint is about. We try to get some additional information. Okay, a little bit more granular. Again, many consumers don't often know this, but again, if they're working with you, you'll certainly know, hey, is the consumer working with a conventional home mortgage? Is it an FHA mortgage? It's good information, it's good data for the Bureau to be able to collect in complaints. After you provide that information, the next thing we go to and we ask, what type of problem is the consumer, is the homeowner having here? Now, you can see with mortgage, we don't have a whole ton and a whole list of granular issues. What we want to do is try to make sure we're as accurate as possible. So again, most of what we see on the servicing side generally comes in where it's either, if you will, performing servicing. Hey, the consumer's making payments on time. There's no issue there. There's no problem with the consumer being unable to pay. There's an issue with an escrow account, is a loan servicing issue. So trouble with the payment process. struggling to pay the mortgage is another alternative in there. But regardless of any issue that's selected, we ask a couple of other questions in mortgages just to be able to get, is a consumer concerned about losing their home to foreclosure? Maybe the consumer says yes, maybe the consumer's worried, maybe they got a temporary forbearance, weren't sure what a forbearance is, and now they're panicked because they're thinking, uh-oh, I've got a balloon payment here, I didn't know anything about this. So again, a couple more questions that we ask. Are you in default on the mortgage? And I'll just go through. Did you pay a company to help avoid foreclosure? This helps us a little bit. I doubt that you'll be seeing that in any complaints that you're working with a homeowner, but again, we want to be able to track, is a consumer going out to some type of, or are they possibly a victim of some sort of a foreclosure scam type operation or anything. So we try to get that information if in fact it applies to the consumer, and we collect that and try to keep that information, share that with our enforcement team. Again, we always ask all consumers, have you tried to fix the problem with the company? And that's just to be able to get it in a little background, whether or not has the consumer, or through working with you, has the consumer made a contact with the company. We ask for a description. What happened? This could be typed in, this could be cut and paste in here, but it's a little bit of information, what's the scenario, what's the problem, what's the background. This information that we capture is sent directly to the company. So I'm just going to type a couple things in there to keep moving through here. We ask the consumer, or if you're submitting a complaint on behalf of a consumer, what would be a fair resolution? What's the desired resolution? What do you want the company or the servicer to do in response to this? I want them to do this, okay? So a little bit of information you put in there. It could be, again, cut and paste or a text. Here's something else that's important. We can also, the complaint, you can attach a document. You can attach several documents. For a complaint that you may be submitting on behalf of a homeowner, you'll want to attach signed written authorization that you can act on behalf of that homeowner. Again, any other documents, if there's a document the homeowner received, a document that you may have submitted to a single point of contact, you may want to put that in there. That becomes part of, if you will, the complaint file. So it's a relatively easy to select different types of files. Up to 10 megs per file can be submitted. Now, again, I know a lot of this is self-explanatory, but what I wanted to do is get through a couple of things to be able to show you some of the tricky navigations in the complaint form. Again, what company? What's the name of the mortgage company? For the most part, the companies are registered, and if somebody types in, I'm just going to randomly pick a name of a company, you can see that companies that are registered, different ways that it's named, it's available, it's right in our drop-down list. Every once in a while, and I'm just showing this example, you can see how every once in a while a consumer may know a company or by a different name. So again, either way, we still capture that information, and we have that, and I want to let you show that. It's another thing that's important is to try to get information to help identify, so that when the company gets the complaint, they can quickly see, match it up with their company records. The Bureau's complaint process does not require companies to respond to non-customers. So again, somebody who may just have something that they want to say about a company, if they don't particularly like a bank or someone like that, but the bank or the company would look at it and say, this is not my customer, I have no application on file here, I have no inquiry on file, they don't have to respond to those. So it's very important to try to get information to make sure the company can match it up with that particular consumer's loan or account. Get that information. Again, I'll put in another name here once again, just for example. Okay, and I'm going to put a fake loan number in here again. And you can see how the form, by showing you this form, you can see how if you miss something, you get an error message. This is one of the key things that I wanted to show you here, and take just a minute or two to go through here. The difference of whether you're submitting a complaint on behalf of a homeowner you're working with, or whether you've just encouraged the homeowner to do that. Now, again, you can certainly encourage at any time, encourage the homeowner, give them our website. We know you're busy. We know how hard that you're working to fight for homeowners, to work with it. So again, if you want to be able to encourage the homeowner to take a few minutes, go on there, put in the complaint, that's fine too. If you want to be able to know that it's submitted and be able to articulate the complaint in a way that that you know the Bureau needs to see that, what you'll want to do is say someone else. So by clicking someone else, you're basically starting the process to say, I'm submitting on behalf of someone else. So I'm just going to go through just for sake of example, put a couple of names in there. And let me just go through. The reason I'm going to pick this is we actually match up zip codes in here, so we want to make sure it's in. So in this case, I'm putting in this example, this Scott Steckel guy. He's the homeowner, and he lives at 145 Main Street in Raleigh. Now I'm submitting the complaint on behalf of it, but so I'm putting his information in first. What's the address of the mortgage property? Again, in situations where there may be, again, a different mailing address, sometimes in some of the rural situations, there's a property address that's different than the mailing address. So for now, I'll just say same. Age, the phone number is optional for there. Again, email. In this situation, this would be the consumer's email address. Now, providing the consumer's email address is very helpful even if you're submitting the complaint. Again, by getting that information, it helps keep the consumer, the homeowner, informed of the complaint status, lets them know that you submitted a complaint on their behalf, reinforces the collaborative effort between you as the counselor and the Bureau. It also provides the consumer, the homeowner, with lots of informational content, which includes continual reinforcing information that we have in all of our literature that sends the message to the homeowner that, you know, they made the right choice in seeking the assistance of a HUD-certified professional housing counselor. So let's say again, I'm just going to put a fake email address in there for right now. I'm going to keep rolling through. Additional person's information. For the most cases, our complaint form's a little bit extra engineered. In some cases, the idea is, okay, well, if it's a joint loan, do you want to put in, you know, husband and wife or situation, or you get two borrowers? You don't need to do that. A lot of times it's just extra key punches and everything. As long as you get one of the borrowers on there, that's fine with that. You can skip that doesn't involve someone else. What you do want to do, though, is you want to go through and again, the additional point of contact. So again, in this scenario, as we scroll down, you can see what we were trying to show here is that, again, by scrolling here, I put my information in, excuse me, as the counselor, I put the homeowner's information in. I could put some affiliations in there. Are you working on behalf of a service member or veteran, or a spouse or a dependent of a service member or veteran? You know, that information could be useful. Again, skip the does it involve someone else, and the additional point of contact. That would be you as the authorized third party in a situation. If you're submitting, you have signed documentation, you're already engaged with the single point of contact or the servicing personnel. So you want to say, yes, should we send updates to anyone else about this complaint? Go into the drop down, housing counselor, you're listed in there. You can list your organizational name if you want to. It's totally optional. Again, putting in just a couple of different names. Going through the information, again, email, and this again, this would be the email address for, in this case, the housing counselor for you. So this would be Eric. Okay, go to the review page. We'll see if we have any errors here, and it's calculating right now. And we can now go down to the review page. And I see in the review page, you can get the product or service, what type of issue. You can go through and edit any of these sections before you submit it. Complaints that will be submitted directly the description of what happened could go out into the public database. If you're submitting on behalf of someone else, that generally wouldn't go out in the public database. It's available only for consumers because they have to positively consent that they want their story put on the Bureau's website. So for the most part, complaints that you would be submitting, you probably wouldn't want to get involved in that too much, just to make sure, because again, you want to make sure that the consumer has that positive. But again, you can see the additional point of contact information that's in there, a certification. One of the key things is that you won't be able to add anything after the complaint is submitted. So if you have documentation, you're submitting information up front, make sure you have that, get that in there, make sure you attach that, submit the complaint through. You'll get an update as the complaint goes through the process. We route complaints very quickly to companies. We've got almost 100% coverage of the services, the bank and non-bank servicing marketplace. So again, companies get these complaints quickly. I mentioned a little bit about the work we do to follow up, to monitor complaints, to make sure companies are providing timely response to complaints. Now, of course, what we can't do at the Bureau is compel or mediate a specific action. That doesn't mean that there's not value, of course, to the complaint process. And I hope, as I illustrated a little bit today, it's a combined and an amplifying effect that not only is this going into the company through the regulatory channel, the company knows the CFPB is looking for a response, the company knows the CFPB is requiring a response. You're working with the servicing personnel, you've worked with a single point of contact, you're trying to resolve and mediate. Again, what we can't do at the Bureau is get involved and say, hey, here's what, Mr. Servicer, here's what I want you to do in this situation. That would not be part of our process, but it doesn't make our process any less meaningful. So we appreciate your support, and we appreciate, again, you all being on the ground and being able to tell the Bureau through these complaints what's happening and being that early warning, and then making sure we can use this data, follow up with the companies, share it with our examiner team, share it with our colleagues in research and markets and regulations, share it with our enforcement attorneys. Last thing I wanted to just mention, went through this process a little bit. I mentioned the Bureau's commitment to consumer privacy. In one aspect of the complaint process, we may have gone a little too far. While authorized third parties can submit a consumer complaint online, and companies will respond to that complaint in detail if the complaint includes a signed written authorization, we're currently unable to provide third parties with access to that written response from the company. You're going to get status information. You're going to know when the response is in, but we can only deliver written response to the actual consumer. That's why providing the information of the consumer's email address can also help us manage what could be an overly conservative posture in the system right now. I can tell you that I'm working with management to see how we can remove some of those restrictions. So I hope that doesn't dissuade you from using the complaint process. It's something that we just had to deal with the Bureau's focus on privacy for right now. It doesn't, of course, lessen the value of the complaints, and it doesn't mean in any way that we want to discourage you from doing this. We need to hear from you. We know that you know, and we appreciate your support of the complaint process. I want to thank you all for the time that you shared today, and thank you for the work that you all do to help your fellow Americans hold on to the dream of home ownership. Thanks for the time.
Thanks, Scott. Before we move on to our next presenter, I do want to let everybody know there are questions, and we'll get to the questions at the end. So hopefully, Scott, you're going to stick around so that you can answer those questions. But one quick thing I want to ask before we move on. So you mentioned the third-party authorization. A couple of questions around that. Number one, what type of third-party authorization will you accept, given that many organizations are virtual and may be doing verbal and virtual type signatures? And then secondly, what happens if the third-party authorization is not included with the complaint? Will it still move forward for at least on behalf of the borrower, or what does happen?
Great question. Thank you for raising that. The Bureau is agnostic on the actual type. So we defer, because we know that companies have legal obligations to protect the consumer's privacy. We defer to what level of authorization the servicer will accept. In some cases, they may, a regular engagement and authorization form that a counselor may get up front in an online document. Again, companies know that a lot of things are signed electronically, real estate sales agreements, things like that. So what is usually acceptable to the servicer to engage with a counselor directly is usually works here, as long as there's a document. In some cases, even if it's not, we won't hold a complaint. We won't not send it to the company if it doesn't have an attached document. But then the company may, if they don't already have something on file, they may hold up and it may slow that process. In another situation, if a counselor knows that, hey, I've already been engaged, I know I'm in the servicer system on behalf of this homeowner, again, the company may look at that, open that up and say, oh yeah, we've worked with Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, and we know that they're working with this housing counselor, so we'll respond. So again, what could happen though in some cases, if the company doesn't see something attached with a complaint and the company doesn't have that consumer's authorization, they may in essence reject the complaint or send it back to the CFPB and say, this was submitted by an unauthorized third party. And then they wouldn't respond to that. You would get a notification. The counselor and the consumer would be aware of that. But in that case, the complaint process would have to start over. So great question that you asked, very important thing to make sure that whatever the counselor has, whether it's electronic authorization or something, you'll get some document and just make sure that we can speed it through as fast as possible.
Great, thank you. Okay, I am going to switch the screen back now. All right, thanks so much, Scott. And we are going to move on now to Ed Merzinski, who is with US PIRG. And Ed has done a lot of work around the database, and he's going to take some time to tell us from an advocate perspective why the complaint process and the database are so important. Excuse me. Ed, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
We sure can.
Great. Well, thanks, Ellie and Bruce, for having me on this call to talk to some of the great housing counselors that you work with. I hope I can add a little bit of color, like a color commentator in a baseball game, if there were baseball games, and I hope there will be baseball games on this issue. And also, I want to give a shout out to Scott and the whole team at Consumer Response for all the help they give me and my colleagues. We've been doing a lot of research into the database since the beginnings of the CFPB, and they've provided us with answers to all of our questions. And at the same time, they've also recently done some tremendous upgrades to the public consumer database. So it's easy to use and it's easy to extract information from it. My primary area of expertise is actually then at the back end. It's studying the data in the database rather than helping people file complaints. Although, of course, every consumer advocate urges consumers to file complaints. And you just heard how easy it is, even for a third party, to file a complaint. You also heard how important it is, even though the CFPB, and I don't know of any government agency that provides kind of a concierge service to take over your complaint and handle it individually. It just cannot be done. They've got 1.6 million complaints. And what Scott talked about was all of the checks and all of the balances that they have. They require X information at a minimum. They require all this detail from companies, including their follow-up plans. They require a substantive kind of response in the data that the complaint is handled by the company, so they at least know what the company has done. And a lot of this information, by the way, is not available completely to the public. We see that a data point, a consumer complaint has been handled, but the CFPB has many more details, and they're quite aware of what companies are doing. And I can tell you that just the very act of filing a complaint makes a difference. It may take a little bit of time. As you saw, though, it's not that hard. It may take a little bit of time, but anybody who files a complaint, the company must respond to the CFPB. And somebody at that company, therefore, must be looking at your problem, and somebody else should be trying to address your problem. If I were a senior executive at any bank or mortgage servicer, since the creation of the database, I would be requiring my techies, because no CEO is a techie, right? I'd be requiring my techies to give me a daily or at least a weekly dashboard. How many complaints did we get? Did we address them? How are we doing compared to other companies that are similar to our company? Are we receiving more complaints? Are we receiving fewer complaints? If we're receiving more complaints, we've got to fix our customer response. We've got to do something to make our company do better. So first, filing a complaint makes a difference directly with a company, and it means that you are going to get some action for your client. Second, the filing of a complaint, even though the CFPB doesn't take over and handle the complaint on a concierge basis, gives the CFPB data that can be used not only by the Consumer Response Division, but by the research, the markets, the regulatory, and the big one, enforcement divisions and supervision divisions, to determine whether there are patterns and practices in the marketplace that suggest law violations and that require supervisory or enforcement follow-up. Now, I would prefer more follow-up and supervision and enforcement than we're receiving right now. But overall, the CFPB has done a lot of important work on behalf of consumers over the years. It's recovered over $12 billion for over 31 million victims of financial abuse of practices. So it is doing a job that's important to do to make the financial marketplace safer. The other thing, okay, so this first is the CFPB complaint that you file on behalf of your client forces a company to respond to it to the CFPB. The CFPB pays attention. The CEO of that company should be paying attention, and the company should be doing a better job. There was an article by a New York Times or a Washington Post op-ed writer about 2 years ago, and she had been a victim of a credit card add-on fee that one of the big New York City banks, I won't mention it, but one of the very biggest Wall Street banks was not giving her her money back. Thousands of dollars in nickel and dime, $9.99 fees that she'd been unknowingly paying the bank for a couple of years. The instant she filed a complaint into the CFPB, the bank sent her the money. It makes a difference for consumers, and it gives the CFPB more data in its surveillance of the marketplace that it can use in both supervisory and enforcement actions. But then the third thing is what I do as an advocate. US PIRG and the Frontier Group, which is our affiliated think tank, have published over a dozen reports drilling deep down into the database and seeing how the financial market for housing, for debt collection, for credit cards, for credit reports, a horrible market, what Rich Cordray, the former director, used to call credit reports and debt collection, dead-end markets. Dead-end markets because you can't vote with your feet. You can't get a new debt collector by walking out and getting in like you can a new bank. And mortgage servicing, to some extent, as you know, is like that too. You don't have a choice. Your mortgage is serviced. You don't pick the servicer. The bank or the previous servicer does. So these are dead-end markets where consumers have a lot of problems, and the database is a window onto those problems. And advocates such as me and the US PIRG and Frontier Group staff and other groups, Consumer Action, and some of the civil rights groups have looked at the database, maybe not as much as we have, but they've looked at the database, and academics have also looked at the database and made suggestions to the CFPB to improve financial protections. Now, most recently, and the CFPB has been doing this as well, we've been doing little mini reports over the pandemic period, and we're finding that consumers are complaining a lot more during the pandemic than they did before. And to me, that's a clarion call. That's a lighthouse flashing emergency lights that we ought to be doing more to protect families who've got no money because they've been laid off, furloughed, lost their jobs, or even lost their homes. They can't pay for food. They worry about having a car that runs and being able to not have it repoed. It's a horrible situation where we've got a pandemic that's scaring people about the health effects, but it's resulted in this tremendous financial uncertainty and financial collapse. And that's a reason that we should all be looking at the database. We should all be filing more complaints in the database, and people are doing it. I can tell you these numbers are incredible. So I encourage you to help your clients file complaints into the consumer database. It helps your client. It helps the company improve its responses. It helps the CFPB decide where to put supervision and enforcement resources. And it helps outside parties take a look at how well government is working to protect consumers in the financial marketplace. I'll just stop right there. I could go on, but I think I've said everything I meant to say. But again, I encourage you also, one last comment I will make. I encourage you also to take a look at the database, not just how to file a complaint, but go to the consumer database page, and the menus on the database page are similar to the menus for filing a complaint, but instead you see the results of all the complaints. You click, I want to look at complaints between the following months. I want to look at complaints about mortgages. I want to look at complaints that have the following issues with those mortgages. I only want to look at complaints with stories or narratives. That's the issue that Scott mentioned, that only a consumer can check, yes, I want my narrative to be public. I want my story to be public. But those are important to read as well. And if you look at the complaints only with narratives, you can search through them pretty quickly because there are fewer of them. About 35 to 45% of all complaints, I believe, have narratives. Depends on the product. The CFPB calls each financial product a product. That just means credit reporting is a product, mortgages are a product, debt collection is a product, bank accounts are a product, etc. So take a look at the database, do some surfing of your own, explore, drill down. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to do a more detailed training on how to surf the database and how to search for information, because more people should be looking at this information. More people should be publishing reports. You, as housing counselors, perhaps you have advocates on your teams who maybe have more time, and you could convince them to do blogs about some of the complaints that you're seeing and what the problems are. Just get the information out. Obviously, a lot of people are hearing about how to complain to the CFPB. A lot of people are complaining. I'd like more people to complain. I think there's a lot of problems out there with this pandemic. So thank you for listening to me, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks so much, Ed. We are now going to pivot to the Q&A section of the call. So Melody, do we have any questions?
We have a lot of questions. Let me go back. Some people are confused. Could either of our presenters just sort of go back and explain the HECM model for counselor certification, just for those who might be new to the information? I think they're both on mute.
I'm going to punt that one to Scott.
Okay.
Well, I think they're asking that of us. So about what is the way that you can take the exam what's the heck a model for taking the exam remotely? I don't think that I know that, Bruce. Do you know what that is?
Well, so it's also a virtual test, and it's my understanding was it was easier to do the camera work on that than it was on the contractor they use currently. So we'll learn more about it. While I've got you, I was hoping maybe Mark or somebody could comment just on the tip line that the CFPB has.
That would be Scott.
Yeah, I think this is Scott Stecklein. I think when we talk about the tip line, it's a little bit the whistleblower, and it's the ability for somebody within the industry to be able to let the Bureau know about a practice or something they're seeing. It's an insider information. What I want to urge everybody is to be extremely careful about, though, is that is not a substitute for the formal complaint submission with a consumer's information. So you don't want to take a consumer's loss mitigation package and try to submit it through the whistleblower email and put yourself at risk of being part of, a consumer privacy breach or anything. So the idea of that is to be able to be a direct line to the Bureau, of be able to say, hey, I think I see something systemic here at company A or B. I'd like to share some of this information, and then that would go in, and our enforcement group will be able to look at that, see what's happening, and maybe reach out to you separately about that. But again, it's not a substitute, and it's something, again, be very careful about submitting actual consumer documentation in that process.
What's the address?
It's on the Bureau's website. I can make sure I get that back out to you. I don't have that in front of me right now, but you can find that information on the Bureau's website.
Okay.
And I'll follow up after this.
Okay. So we have several questions about submitting complaints to the CFPB. One participant asked, said that they filed a few complaints recently that do not appear on the complaint portal database on CFPB as they did previously, and they just want to know if there's a reason why they cannot access complaints following filing.
Yeah, and I think that gets to two different points depending on the nature. I think what that might be relative, and when we talk about the database, first of all, the public database that Ed discussed a little bit, that's that public listing of complaints. There's a delay in a complaint being listed out publicly until the company has had the complaint for 15 days or whenever the company would respond, whichever comes first. So if somebody submits a complaint today and the company doesn't respond until day 14, that complaint won't be listed out in the public database. As far as those consumers' narratives, I talk about the consumer story, those consumers who want to put out the description of what happened to them, that takes even longer. That can take 60 days, because what we do is we scrub out all the personal identifiers. We don't put in the individual consumer's name or their home address or anything that could let the public find out who the individual consumer or homeowner is behind that. Now, if the question was relative to the advocate or the counselor seeing the details of the response, that's that challenging privacy thing that we're struggling with right now. And again, if I sound a little apologetic, it's a little bit of again, we are the federal government, and again, consumer privacy has always been a major issue. And we've had a couple of years ago, we were asked to really tighten up anywhere that there could be any potential for a breaching of consumers' private information. And one of the things we did was the third-party complaint submission. As I said, third parties authorized, you can send a complaint, submit it on behalf of the consumer, we send it to the companies respond, but then that detail of what the company said isn't available to the third party in the Secure Bureau website. So depending on which question that was, I hope I answered both sides of that.
Thank you. No, that's actually related to the next question about lender service or responses to complaints. So we had someone say that they submit, their clients submit legitimate complaints to CFPB, and the lender service or response, and they get a notification that the complaint was resolved, even though they didn't receive an adequate response from the lender servicer, so it's something they can do. Is there anything that can be done for CFPB to inform people when something is not resolved on their end, or do they have to start over with a new complaint?
Okay, thanks for that. Again, and that gets to part of the thing versus whether or not resolved. We can't push for a specific resolution. So in other words, we can't tell the company in an individual complaint, hey, I've got Scott Steckel's mortgage here. He wanted a modification with a payment of $500 a month. I want you to approve that. We can't do that. What we can do, though, is make sure when it comes back, we let the consumer know, we let the advocate know, of course, that the company responded, provide the information, here's what the company said, and then we use that internally. We look at that internally. We say, did the company adhere to the Bureau's servicing rules? Did the company do what it should do? Is there a problem with this company? Are we finding more issues with this company? And then that's where a little bit of the Bureau's authorities have to work behind the scenes for a little while. We may take that and we'll share that with the examination team and say, hey, we've been seeing some things here, and we don't think company A is following the Bureau's federal regulations for mortgage servicing. Let's take a look deeper. And then the examiner's way go to that company and be able to say, hey, I've got 27 complaints here for the last 3 months. I want to take a look at these borrower files here and see what the situation is. So a lot of times, I know that it's frustrating because you may look at it, you may say to the response and say, oh, well, that didn't really get done what I hoped that was going to get done. But I can tell you that it helps get done what needs to be done. And it may not be immediate and it may not be direct, but it's very important. Again, I'll go back to the financial crisis and the housing crisis. Many of you remember the National Mortgage Monitor that was holding mortgage servicers responsible. Some of you, if you're on the West Coast, you may remember the California monitor, the California AG at the time. Had an aggressive monitoring program out there to give relief to homeowners who were affected due to foreclosure issues or problems, systemic problems in there. Both of those organizations were heavy users of the Bureau's complaints and complaint data to be able to see that, have that data, and be able to go directly to those servicers and say, no, here's some facts, here's some figures, here's some numbers. We want relief for these homeowners for these servicing practices. So again, you could probably see, you can hear in my voice a little bit my true belief and support of the process. Even though you don't see in an individual complaint, you may look at it and say, the CFPB didn't get done what the borrower wanted to get done. Does not mean that that complaint did not have value. Thanks for asking that question and for the opportunity to talk to it.
Thank you. We have a few more on CFPB. Forgive me, but people are very, very interested in the topic. Is there a way that people can see who are bad players, if you will, when it comes to mortgage servicing on the website?
Excellent question. That gets a little bit to what Ed talked about with the public-facing consumer complaint database. And as Ed said, the industry concerns know this as well. I applaud the Bureau's director for, the Bureau was under a lot of pressure for a while to discontinue publishing complaints. The director of the Bureau took a courageous stand and said, no, we're going to keep this data public. And as Ed mentioned, that's on the Bureau's website. You go to consumerfinance.gov. You can then go into data and research and go to the consumer complaint database. So for what you could do then is drill down in the information. You could say, okay, I'm only interested in mortgage complaints. You could then look at different time series. You could say, I want to see a listing of all mortgage complaints submitted to the CFPB since January 1st of 2020, and I'd like to see which companies have the most complaints. You can export that data. You could drill down to see it on a state-by-state level. You could even go down into more geographical and be able to go in and say, okay, are there any particular hotspots in the state? You can look by zip code and be able to see, are there areas where there's more problems than others? Are there areas where we know that there's problems, but there's no complaints? So the public-facing database is a great tool to get exactly that, to be able to see where are the trouble spots, and where are the problems with the companies? Ed may want to share a little bit more about his team and their use of the data and how they've been able to pinpoint things.
Well, thanks, Scott. And I think you've answered the question. The problem, and we respect this issue too, is that bigger companies usually will have more complaints, and you have to try to normalize it. Well, which company does more work in New York, whereas which company does more work in California? And so that's one way you can kind of isolate the differences. But even if you forget that it's not a normalized list, meaning it hasn't been adjusted for the size of the company and the number of mortgage servicing files that it has, it's worth it to take a look, search by a particular company, and open up the narrative view and flip through and see. I mean, it's very easy to do with checking accounts. It's not as easy maybe with mortgages, where the complaint narratives tend to be longer and explain all the mistakes that the mortgage servicer might have made before they put them into foreclosure by mistake. But you can look and see if a lot of people are saying, I called the bank and it didn't do this. I called the bank and it didn't do this. I called the bank and it didn't do this. If you see a lot of complaints that are the same, that ought to be a good clue for you, and that ought to help you make your complaint or figure out another advocacy position that your group might want to take, because the company that you're looking into has got so many complaints. But it is a great database. You can open it up in Excel. You can open it up in better programs such as Python, or worse programs such as Access. I just think Access is too hard for the average consumer to work. But you can then rank companies, which is company number one, which is company number two, based on the total number of complaints, et cetera.
Thank you. This is a question regarding what kind of complaints you can submit. So we have two questions. Can someone file a complaint about like housing associations or property management regarding their HOA payments? And our second question is, does the same site apply to rental housing, student loans, or credit reporting issues and complaints?
Another excellent question, and it breaks down with a couple of yeses and a couple of nos. Credit or consumer reporting is in fact one of the highest volume complaints that we've been experiencing over the last year or so. So complaints about errors in consumers' credit reports, complaints about credit reporting companies' investigations of disputes, all of those things that impact consumers' credit reports. That's certainly within the scope of our complaint process. So again, not only do we send complaints to your national companies, your Experians, TransUnions, and Equifaxes, but also specialty credit reporting companies that we would send to certain again, screening companies that would be out there. The Bureau has a list of different types of credit reporting companies that are specialty credit reporting companies. We would accept complaints about that. As far as housing agencies, and again, it depends on, again, some housing agencies actually do lending. So again, if the entity is providing a consumer financial product or service, doing lending, providing loans, providing mortgages, you can usually submit a complaint there. We don't take complaints about private landlords. So for instance, again, if somebody has an issue with an eviction, and again, they want to complain about their landlord, whatever, the CFPB is not the place for that complaint. We wouldn't be under there. So what you always want to think about it, is the company, the provider of the service, is it a financial product or service, a consumer financial product or service? And if you answer that question, usually you can say, if the answer is yes, we'll handle that complaint.
Thank you. We have a few questions on the complaint process. So first part of the question is, could housing counselors get a copy of the complaint report that would show mortgage companies and servicers with the most complaints? And the second one is, with the beginning of the complaint being to the complaint being received by the servicer?
Okay, we're actually at this dialogue this afternoon. Thanks, everyone. I'll answer in reverse. As far as the timing of that, one of the things that we've done, we do a lot of audit, a lot of complete. We use a lot of system tools that most complaints that we send to mortgage servicing technology make sheet on some time as possible. So there's generally very little delay in getting that to the company. As far as the listing, and for the counselor listing, again, the public-facing database would be the best place to get that. To go out to consumerfinance.gov/complaint database and then be able to see that updates every day. So every morning we update that website with complaints that companies have responded through the prior close of business. So it's almost real-time data that you'll be able to see. So, and again, I want to give away a little tip and a little promo of tomorrow's event. If you're interested in more on the public database, tomorrow there's a public event. You can go, it's for Consumer Financial Protection Week. And in fact, my boss will be doing a demonstration of the latest enhancements to the public database. So for anybody interested in that, if you have the time tomorrow, please register and you'll find that very informative.
Thank you. Final question. Can a consumer make a direct complaint themselves through CFPB and still get a response? Or is it recommended to go through housing counselors?
Either or. I say all of the above, and I think it depends. And look, now, I know how busy counselors are, and I know how hard counselors are working. You know, and sometimes, you know, again, it may be best to divide and conquer. And again, we certainly accept complaints directly from consumers. We even accept complaints by telephone. So even a consumer that might not be, you know, internet savvy or form savvy, they can give us a call. And we'll walk through the complaint form with them, and we'll take that complaint, we'll ask all the questions that we need, and we'll send that. You know, sometimes the direct complaint from the homeowner is also a little bit faster for a response because there's no written third-party authorization. The trade-off is we know that counselors know what's going on, and we know that when a counselor is rolling up their sleeves working with a homeowner, we're going to be able to get some facts. Sometimes consumers can ramble a little bit. And, you know, sometimes the complaint, you know, it starts to talk about Uncle Fred and this and that. And sometimes they lose the impact of, look, here's what's going on. Here's what's wrong with what's going on. And here's what the company should do to fix it. So I defer to everyone out there and their expertise and the expertise of the homeowner they're working with. Either option is good with us.
Great. Thank you so much.
Is that all of our questions?
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right. Well, I am going to turn it back over to Bruce.
All right. Thanks, everybody. So just a quick mention about becoming a member of NHRC. You can go to our website and the membership application's there. If you're not already a member, we have had a very good experience with our what I would have thought would have been a difficult 3 or 4 months during the COVID-19 experience. Many of you have renewed your membership dues. We've gotten a number of new memberships in, so we appreciate that. In terms of membership benefits, just a quick reminder, we have a discount on the credit reports, which we think is pretty valuable with CoreLogic Credco, and gives you the best pricing available for comparable services for a housing counseling agency, and they're the leading provider in the country, so this has worked out quite well. We also have a relationship with Savvy, the online student loan application, and it's also an excellent tool for figuring out how to what if an income-based program is in the client's best interest. And while the service itself is free, to get them to actually file the forms, there's a charge for that. and it's deeply discounted if you go through your membership with NHRC. And when you become a member, we send you the special code you can use to do that. And that's applicable. It's important to say it's applicable for your clients. It's also applicable for your staff. And for people who have challenges with student loans, the public loan forgiveness program is available to them. This program helps people make the application, and that's helpful. And then also, if you have joined Savvy for that year, they'll give you reminders to make sure you meet the deadlines. And meeting the deadlines, especially in documenting the public service forgiveness option, is a really helpful piece of the puzzle there. That we know that a number of people had a hard time in the first round actually qualifying for it, and being part of a system where you document every year what your income is really useful. Quick reminder to organizations: if you've got staff who could use this and are in the right payment agreement, Savvy will help you figure out what that is. You can go back to whenever they started employment and document the entire history of your staff person's employment, which really helps solve some of the problems at the end of the 10-year period for people who actually will qualify for the loan forgiveness. But anyways, that's also available to us. I send out some opportunities to get media coverage to our networks through the membership, and occasional unusual funding announcements of things that aren't part of the mainstream, but are interesting opportunities, creative options that groups might be able to tap into that might give you a new funding source. That's just an occasional thing. But the main thing is you're really supporting our work, our ability to lobby, and have flexibility. We're not dependent on lenders for that income, and it allows us to do the good work we're doing. So thank you so much for the call. Our plan is to be back in 2 weeks on the last Thursday in July, the 30th. Well, look out for a note on the leaders call on that, and we'll have more to talk about. We'll certainly keep you informed on the leaders list to go through all the things we're doing. So take care, everybody. Thanks for your good work.